So guys, I've been getting comments in some of our videos about certain phrases and terms that we use, and they don't know what it means. Things like, what does Sandbox mean? What the hell is a TWAB? And I know, there's a lot to take in as a new player. And yes, with New Light being launched, Destiny has added so many new players in the past month. So without further ado, guys, we're gonna go over the list of terms that Destiny players need to know. So first on this list, super easy, let's just go over the weekly update, the TWAB. Now, TWAB actually stands for This Week at Bungie. It comes out every Thursday. It's got some news bits as well as some sandbox changes, kind of goes over bugs, different things that are happening in the game, and what's to come in the next week. Which kind of brings us into the next term, which is the term reset. You've probably heard some people say, hey, I'm gonna wait till reset to grind this raid out or to do this activity. Now, there's actually a daily reset that happens, and for me, it's like 11 a.m. Central, which is 9 a.m. Pacific. Depending on your time zone in relation to that, that is when reset occurs. But there's also a weekly reset, which is when all of your pinnacle sources as well as your power gear sources refreshes. So that is the term reset. Now moving on. Now we're getting into the other term, sandbox. That is a term we say on this channel a lot. Now, I don't know what the technical term for sandbox is, but for us, it's essentially the play environment that Bungie has given us. So for instance, whenever we refer to previous sandboxes, we normally point to certain weapons in those sandboxes that were extremely dominant. We don't really remember the sandbox name itself. Like, no one really jumps up and goes, hey, you remember sandbox 1.3.2.5? No one really remembers those values. Instead, you remember things like, hey, you remember the Graviton Lance meta? That is referring to a certain play environment that Bungie had in a previous sandbox that allowed for Graviton Lance to be a monster. Which brings us into the next term. Yes, you heard us just say Graviton Lance was meta. Meta has a lot of different meanings, and really it kind of splits between both environments, both for PvP, which is player versus player, or PvE, which is player versus environment. But the term meta normally refers to the more dominant weapons in that current sandbox, in that current environment. So you've heard a lot of things like, hey, you remember the Uriel's Gift meta? That was an auto rifle back in year 1 that was extremely deadly. Same with Graviton Lance, Anio. I've often mentioned the Clever Dragon meta back in Rise of Iron. So the terms meta really describes the sandbox, and that's kind of how we remember certain sandboxes. We don't necessarily remember what that sandbox number value was in terms of like the patch name that Bungie gave it, but instead remember the weapons that stood out the most in that sandbox, which defines the term meta. Now, moving on to another term called cheese. Now, cheese has different meanings in PvP. Some people kind of like approach cheesy levels when they use nasty setups or really easy setups that can guarantee you kills. You can call it cheese. A lot of people just call it meta in PvP. Inside of PvE though, the appropriate definition of cheese is like being able to bypass certain mechanics, say in a boss encounter, thus allowing you to kill whatever it is you're trying to kill much quicker, thus the term cheese. The boss in the Last Wish raid, Riven, is much harder to do if you were to do the exact mechanics that it was trying to propose, but instead, a cheese was discovered where you can essentially just kill the boss inside that first room there. One of the first cheeses ever found was actually the Templar in Vault of Glass, where you could throw solar grenades at the Templar and push him off the cliff, which is kind of where the term cheese began. So anyways, if you're ever in a party chat and you hear someone talking about a cheese, they're not talking about Swiss, baby. They're talking about killing things outside of the proposed mechanics that Bungie has in place. Now, another term that's kind of more of a PvP term is time to kill, or also known as TTK, which is sometimes confused for the Taken King, which was an expansion back in D1, but for us, TTK normally means time to kill, which is how fast it takes to kill other Guardians inside of Crucible. You normally don't refer to TTK values inside of PvE, as time to kill values when given out by other content creators and other people are normally very low numbers, like 0.5 seconds, maybe a second, at most maybe a second and a half, That's kind of like the measuring stick for how good weapons are inside of PvP. Now, it's not everything, because a lot of the weapons do have TTK values relatively close to each other, but depending on the weapon type and stuff, consistency and other things, as well as perks, higher TTK weapons can actually outperform lower TTK weapons, which kind of brings us to the term inside of PvE, which is like the measuring stick there, which is DPS, or damage per second. Now, damage per second, I know in some games is like one of the most important measuring factor. For Destiny, it is important, but again, it's not everything. Similar to something like time to kill, damage per second is an important factor, but so is total output of damage. And depending on, of course, certain encounters, what it is you're trying to kill is how you can decide between both of those. The main thing is time to kill inside of Crucible is the measuring stick. DPS inside of PvE is also a good measuring stick. Now, another term that is widely used, and it navigates itself between PvP and PvE, and that is the term blueberry. Now, you're probably wondering, what the hell is that? What is all these different foods we keep bringing up? Cheese? Now blueberries? The term blueberry, though, actually refers to your mini-map and the blue dot that your teammate represents. Now, not your fire team member, your teammate. The people that you randomly match up with in a matchmake activity. Now, there is no communication for the most part with blueberries, as most blueberries do not openly communicate. They just do blueberry things. This gentleman right here inside of this haunted forest, a very nice guy. We waved at each other before this encounter started, but unfortunately, he did some blueberry things, such as dying when getting my rest, which normally draws out the expression, "God damn it, blueberry." It's not a personal expression, it just happens. And it's how we talk about players that normally throw on some level. Wow, that's really toxic. And I know it sounds super toxic. Nothing against this guy right here. I put him in a terrible situation. Now, there's also a term that counters the term blueberry, also known as bayberry. Bayberry is when you expect the blueberry to do normal blueberry things, and then he suddenly does things that are incredible, such as you're in the middle of an elimination game or a trials game, you die, and so does your teammate, and now the only one left alive is the blueberry. Most of us, from previous experience, lose all hope, but then the blueberry does some crazy shenanigans. He gets the kill, another kill, and then the team wipe, and he wins the round. This blueberry has now been elevated to the status of bayberry. Now, the term bayberry can actually refer to any activity, for PvE and for PvP. You come across guys that are just like one-man armies inside of PvE, and you happen to just randomly luck up and match with this guy or that gal. So ultimately, bayberries are not as common as blueberries, but they deserve every bit of that status. Now, another term, one that we use here on the channel, is the term nasty. Now, I know people say nasty out there, but listen, there's not too many things we like to take credit for, but nasty originated here. When I say a weapon is nasty, it's pretty nasty. It's pretty decent. And then when I go nasty, it's too decent. It's too good. It's disgustingly good. Regardless, a lot of people say I say everything is nasty, which is not the case. I don't hand those terms out to just everything, all right? But normally we're always reviewing things that are, of course, nasty. That's why we review it. Now, another term that you've heard us say, and I know I confused the hell out of some new light players, is the term Greg. Yes, I had some people that were like, who the hell is Greg and what are you talking about? Actually, there's Greg and then there's Kevin. Greg is the ogre found on Titan. Kevin is the knight found on Mars in that lost sector. Both of these guys are excellent test dummies for damage testing. And I know a lot of people use like the tribute hall for damage testing. We're just a little old school. We still like to use Greg and Kevin. Regardless though, when you hear people say, hey, let's go test this out on Greg, just know they're referring to the ogre found on Titan. And just some lore facts, he's actually like second in line for the Hive Throne. Now, the last term that I really wish I did not have to say, that I feel like we have to go over because this is Destiny, is the term DDoS, which is distributed denial of service. Now, DDoS used to be something that I would like see on Twitter every now and then when, like, I don't know, Sony was getting knocked offline. And I was like, oh, okay, that should only happen to big corporations, right? Like, I'm safe. No, that's not the case. If you're playing Destiny right now, unfortunately, you may run into this issue one day. And whether it's in high-level comp or for us, it was way back when inside of trials, there are DDoSers out there that will knock you off your internet. And they do this because they're able to obtain your IP address through Destiny servers. Now, me personally, I've only been DDoS, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 times, which sounds like a lot. It does. But only one of those times was it really bad. Like, I had this one guy got a hold of my IP address, and he just kept bumping me offline every time I went live to stream. Normally, most DDoSers aren't that big of an asshole, but he was, and I eventually had to get a new modem. Unfortunately, though, you may run into those kind of things inside of Destiny. So if your internet and everything just ends up getting cut off in the middle of a comp match, it's a good chance you just got DDoS. So guys, those are pretty much our terms. There's really nothing else here I wanted to add. I think the other term that you could have had is optimal. That's like a term that Datto uses a bunch, and a lot of people, when they refer to Datto, they refer to optimal. It's kind of another spin on meta. It's essentially like the best DPS options or the best damage options when referring to something inside of PvE. So when you go, hey, yeah, that's optimal. But now it's just like turned into a big meme. Regardless though, these are the terms that I feel like every Destiny player should know. There's actually many other terms and like abbreviations that I'm sure many people will list in the comments below. These terms that I just gave out though, those are the basic ones. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.